Japanese role-playing games have been a cornerstone of every gaming elitist's library. I should know, I have a lot of them. At their best, these games deliver phenomenal combat depth for people who have patience, and stories that stick with you long after you strike down the final boss. For me personally, my introduction to this genre came from the trio of SNES, PlayStation, and Game Boy. SNES had the few scraps that actually released in Australia. PlayStation 1 had the bulk of my formative memories with the genre, and I played Pokemon obviously. And while it never truly died, it did peter out a bit before having another resurgence with the DS, since it kept remaking or porting old RPGs but for the giant international player base. This latter golden age saw the especially relevant 3D remakes of Final Fantasy 3 and 4 for the DS. They were mechanically rich games, made with modern sensibilities, and they have charmingly low-poly chibi character models. So of course, let's do that again, but for the Nintendo 3DS, and while we're at it, make it an original game. And that's what Bravely Default is. Thanks for watching. Next time I'll be talking about Sabre. Okay, I guess I should talk more about Bravely Default. And to correct myself, Bravely Default was specifically being made as the follow-up to the Final Fantasy spin-off, The Four Heroes of Light, a game for the DS you may not have heard of, and if you have, then good for you. But that game was also inspired by, among other things, Final Fantasies 3 and 4, so in a roundabout kind of way, this additional correction isn't really needed, but I'm just doing it to avoid those comments. Anyway, back onto Bravely Default. First of all, I love the name. It's very much an incomprehensible mess to people who haven't played the game, and a completely logical and fitting name for those of us who have played it. Plus it's catchy and unmistakable, so I can't really confuse it with anything else. Unfortunately, the two sequels to this don't get off so easy. But let's rewind back to when this was the only game in the series, and the hot talk of all the 3DS players that wanted a nice Square Enix RPG. In my immediate circles, it was inescapable. I saw nothing but love for this game, which is what left me confounded when I played it, because I'm not really in that camp. I know I'm one of those people who is usually charitable and nice to games, so don't take this as a condemnation. There is a great game inside Bravely Default, but I have this weird roller coaster of emotions. If I think about Bravely Default on a whim, I think I don't like it because of all the stuff I didn't enjoy. But then if I think about it longer, I remember I love this game and for all its great attributes. But then if I keep thinking about it again, I remember what I disliked. It's a vicious cycle where my opinions are constantly in flux, and honestly that's why I've delayed this video for about a year. I'm not quite sure where I land. I like being nice, and when I'm not I at least know where I feel on something, but this game has split me so evenly, it's fascinating. This isn't even the case of me finding the game meh, because of equal pros and cons or anything. It avoids the middle ground all of the time, and just fights for either extreme of my heart. But let's start at the beginning. The first thing the game does is show me my feet. I know it's here for the AR introduction video, but I won't forgive the game for this. It's already off to a bad start. Thankfully things improve quickly. We're almost immediately introduced to all our heroes, who each daisy chain into the story quickly enough that it doesn't feel like we have a main party member. Even if Tiz is the one we always follow, and after him it's followed by the closest thing we have to a main character here, Agnes. Then we get Ringabel, then Adia, who I usually have as the lead member even though she's the last addition. Agnes and Adia have the real story weight here. They're the ones who actually know what's happening, and Tiz, our introductory character, is largely a fish out of water who we can relate most to. On the few occasions the party splits up, we always control Tiz, and he's at one point called the group leader, so I could call him the protagonist even if I see this as an equal group. I love this trio. Then you have the amnesiac Ringabel, and I do adore his name and some of his contributions to the story, but he's also the character burdened with being the annoying anime sex pest. So yeah, most of the time I hate him. The world these four inhabit was an immediate draw to me. It's your typical RPG world kept in balance by 4 elemental crystals, However, the main appeal is this is already a world where darkness has reigned and the elements are out of whack. It's signified with the fact that we immediately get our all-in-one JRPG airship boat, but we're still gated and can't access the entire world immediately. The oceans are acidic, so we can't sail, and initially the airship can only dock at ports and shallow waters. We have to restore balance to the world for multiple story reasons, but it also rewards us with more ways to traverse this diverse world. This story is at times great. I love a lot of the themes here, as well as the motives for our villains. This is a world that really needs saving, and the changes you make are immediately obvious. Agnes, one of our leads, is a vessel for wind energy, basically a person in charge of the balance of this element, and well, someone who isn't allowed a lot of free time or fun given the duties associated with it. With her in tow, we get a great understanding of this world and the secrets it holds. Adia likewise makes this all personal. She was a part of a large army trying to capture Agnes, and as you'd expect, has lots of ties, including family within an antagonistic force. It's a grand story that doesn't forget the smaller moments. Unfortunately, it doesn't stop most dialogue being drawn out, or just consisting of what is to me unfunny attempts of humour. And when someone as unfunny as me says a game is not funny, you know it's bad. Thankfully, a lot of the core story is interesting, and it makes up for most of these stumbles. And while I'm being nice, I'll praise the visuals. Even as someone who personally doesn't love the look of the characters, they are all very expressive, and they change their looks as they class change, more on that later. Plus the enemies here are all wonderfully well realised, I love them. But what I really want to get into is the focus of the overworld and towns. The overworld is kind of standard, but it gets a lot of bonus points for me for being made up of 3D polygons, which look great presented normally, and even more so with the 3DS's core gimmick turned on. But the towns, I cannot say enough good things about them. They're beautiful and show how talented the art team was. It's these painted wonders with limited animation that we have to weave around, and they all feel like complete and believable spaces. It's a similar feeling to pre-rendered backgrounds of PlayStation 1 RPGs, but it's much prettier with these flourishes. These towns all manage to look completely distinct from each other, and they show different cultures around the world, and best of all, they do it without just cribbing notes from real-world cultures. These feel like believable and unique locations, without the back of my mind just saying, oh, this is the area with Chinese architecture, this is the country taking influence from Nordic culture, this is the one where they gave everyone Australian accents. This loving detail also applies outside of dungeons, which are sometimes the most stunning parts of a game, since they're just grand vistas that don't need to accommodate much. Everything feels so lovingly crafted here, though there are exceptions like the bosses appearing in the blue void dimension, but even these still add little flourishes since it's not uncommon for boss fights to have back and forth dialogue with our party, or sometimes even with each other if the boss is multiple enemies at once. And when the dialogue isn't being stupid jokes about haha this guy sexualizes women, the characterization and dialogue can be great. We even have party chat here, where we stop and hear their banter, and since there is no silent protagonist, all four of our guys get to say a lot of things in lots of different formations. And an extra layer of this sees itself in the pause screen. There's a fairy who accompanies us throughout the entire game, and she gets a lot of time to shine here. She'll say what's on her mind, and it's usually just a reminder of our current objective, which is great for a game designed with quick play sessions in mind. At best, what she says is layered in such a way we get a good sense of her personality, and at worst, it's just helpful exposition, but that's good, this is just a pause screen after all. It's good that most of the dialogue works, because this game has a ton of it, though it's hard to complain when so much of it is either optional or can be skipped. Plus we have voice acting, and it's the caliber you'd expect for a handheld Square Enix JRPG of the era. There's some good, there's some less good, and there's some characters with voices you'll hate. And look, I've been dancing around it long enough. How is the gameplay itself? Well, let's start with the bits I don't like as much. Exploration feels slow. Our movement speed isn't particularly fast, and the world itself is either just empty flat environments or annoying mountainous hallways that halt things even more. In dungeons it's even less appealing to me. Everything is just zigzagging blocky paths with lots of smaller doorways or stairways that lead to only a small area with a treasure chest and nothing else. So it's lots of slow exploration through rooms that all look the same throughout a single dungeon. One upside to exploring is the bottom screen, which does its usual thing of being an ever-present map. I will always love and defend that in these dual-screen games. And when you're in the overworld, it basically tells you the location of everything of interest, which while helpful also does disincentivize exploration. I know the game provides a lot of options to disable this and change the game's mechanics in a lot of neat ways. So this isn't a deal breaker, it's just something to be aware of. You can disable the location markers if you wish. In fact, options, while great on the surface, can deflate tension entirely. Sometimes I don't have the willpower not to use these mechanical assists, and I suspect others feel the same. The most famous example is the ability to turn up or down the frequency of random encounters, including the ability to disable it outright. This sounds nice, but it also leads to situations where I just do it when near death and low on magic, and instead of a tense run back to an inn, it's just a lifeless stroll back with no risk of anything bad happening. If it were up to me, I'd probably leave the option to change encounter rates only be available in a town, or maybe be done with one of the many NPCs who save the game. But since everyone loves this game, I suspect it's just a me thing. It's just that it's too much power and I feel like it shouldn't be accessible at every single point of the game, including inside dungeons. I'd rather it be done from specific safe areas, and then we can rely on things like repel items, so there's a cost for getting out of dungeons completely safely. Don't take this as me not loving the option. I turned off encounters a lot when I'm just trying to walk from place to place, or explore a dungeon without constant interruptions. It's just that I wish there was more of a motivation against breaking the game, while also allowing it to be an option for players who want or need it. This game has a lot of mechanics to help struggling players, but there is a bit of a cost associated with them. In this case I'm talking about things like Bravely Second, or recruiting players for battle. I just wish this mechanic also had a little bit of a cost associated with it, but I'm pretty sure I'm speaking into a void, so I'll shut up on the subject. Other than that, I love the implementation of options here. This game is really robust. Another particular highlight I love is being able to turn off experience points, money, or vocation point gains after battles. If you want to grind your class levels without actually leveling up the characters, you can, and if you want to play normally but limit the amount of money you receive, you can also do that. It feels so nice being able to upgrade the character's class without worrying about them becoming overpowered level-wise. Every RPG with a class system needs this. And oh god, do I love the class system here. This might be my favourite part of the whole game, and possibly my favourite system like this in any RPG I've played. I do realise how this comes across. I don't like playing most of the game, but boy do I love the numbers going up. I don't care, I'm sticking to it. Over the course of the game, you gradually unlock classes, and these are primarily from side quests, which is both an excellent reward, but also does kind of put you in a situation where lots of the side content is kind of mandatory, even though it technically isn't. We get lots of the standard stuff here, and also the fair share of weird ones that really play well with the unique aspects of combat here. So far so good, and in traditional fashion, these vocations level up and give you more options. Here it's both for new moves in battle, and also passive abilities which can be slotted into our character's limited quantity of passive bonuses. The real joy here is class mixing. Formerly each character can only be one class at once, and their design changes to reflect this. Tiz in a top hat is a merchant, but when he's a knight he'll dress like one obviously, and this ninja one is, well, a ninja. But in the menus we can assign a secondary class, which means we can use that class's battle abilities. So for example, this knight Tiz can still throw money at the enemy, which is exclusive to merchants. On its own, this adds lots of possibilities, but there's also the passive abilities I mentioned earlier. Once unlocked, these can be freely equipped to that character, even if they're a combination of two unrelated classes. So you may want to specifically level up any other class just for these bonuses. They can be great. For example, giving a character with 2 support classes more defense through the dual wielding shields ability, which is granted by leveling up the Knight class. Or it might be more simple things like leveling up Red Mage so your non-Red Mage characters can still get 20% increase to their MP. Each class also has, in addition to different stats, different weapon proficiencies. So if you want your sword magic unit to still use spears, because of their secondary class attacks being buffed for spear users, you can still do that. Just make sure you equip the weapon proficiency ability. It's such a good system. I love every second of it, but I'm also a quiet loner who likes numbers going up. I'm probably not representative of the average person. This class stuff being so open to customization is important, because this game doesn't pull any punches. The average fodder can overwhelm you if you're not paying attention, or are unlucky. And the bosses are the difficult spectacles you'd want them to be. Without a plan, they'll all defeat you quickly, and this is very much the type of RPG where your support classes are the most important things you have, and they do much more than just healing and reviving. And everything is ratcheted up even further with the Brave and Default systems the game shares its name with. Usually characters and enemies start battles with a 0 next to their name. If they default, which is basically blocking, the number goes up by 1. If a character attacks, normally the number won't change, but if they brave, the number goes down by 1, all the way to a minimum of -4. And braving allows you to get an extra move in that same turn, and they can do up to 4 actions per turn with the maximum use of these points. Though generally to get there, they either have to block for a series of turns, or dip into the negatives and find themselves essentially unable to do anything for a while until they hit 0 again. It's a fantastic risk-reward mechanic that can have characters deal untold amounts of damage in a single turn, or do things like revive multiple teammates and then buff them in a single action. On its own, it also turns guarding, one of the least used actions in most turn-based RPGs, into something pivotal that everyone will do repeatedly. Plus, some of the fancier attacks or spells cost these points instead of magic, so it can mean leaving yourself vulnerable after a single powerful attack or buff. This whole system, combined with class variety, and just the general difficulty of things, makes this one of my favourite battle systems in the entire genre. And while I do love vanilla turn-based combat, this just shows how much more we can get from the system with some extra tweaks. Plus it helps that the sound design here is so satisfying. Beating the crap out of enemies rarely sounds this good. Throughout most of the game, I never tired of battles. In fact, they were my reward waiting for me after navigating all these dungeons I didn't care for. But towards the end of the game, this changed. And without spoiling things, I'll just say that this is my favourite part of the game narratively, but it doesn't translate it to being fun to play. Because it really did devolve into a slog. And it's only held up by a story, which I'm sure would divide many people too. This game really didn't know when to end, and I was getting bored of a routine long before the endgame hit, so all this extra stuff was fatiguing me even further. It left a sour taste in my mouth as I played it, but it's also the kind of situation where long after playing it, I can sit down and say, yeah, I loved it, because I'm blocking out all the tedium. And then we get back to my never-ending conflicted nature, going from liking to not liking to liking again. Damn this game. I almost wish it was worse. That way I'd at least know where I stand on it. But at the end of the day, any complaints I have are waved away, because this game has a murder mystery section in it briefly. All is forgiven. Plus it did one of those things I haven't seen in a while, where the game's full title is recontextualized later in the game with new plot information. They go as far to edit the main menu logo on a late game save file, just to give it a new meaning, and that's a chef's kiss moment for me. God, look at me, now I'm complimenting the game again. I just need to remember how mundane lots of the actual gameplay is, or how some of the writing is not great. See, I feel better now. My opinion of Bravely Default will remain resolute for the next few minutes before it changes again. But one game my opinion on will never change is Sabre Wulf for the Game Boy Advance, so make sure you listen to me explain why this game no one remembers is actually one of my favourite games on the system. I I promise it's good. It's my second favourite Rare game on the GBA, falling right behind Grunty's Revenge, but just edging out its Mr. Pants. And trust me, edging pants is always a good time.